Everybody, while we're waiting to get started, as people are logging on, feel free to drop your name and affiliation in the chat. Also, what you're what you're looking forward to from the conversation and hope to get out of it. We'll give it another 30 seconds and we'll get rolling. Okay, I've got 12:01, so why don't we kick it off? Hi, everybody. I'm Carl Russick. I'm a senior advisor of the Water Center at Penn, and been working with the Southwestern Pennsylvania Water Network over the last several years, and pleased to welcome you to this webinar, building relationships to maximize water infrastructure funding in Southwest PA. And the focus is on the building relationships part, as much of our work has been over the last several years. If you haven't seen the message in the chat, feel free to drop your name and your affiliation in there, as you'll see other folks have been doing, and also give a feel for what you're looking for from the event in any way we can help you out. And with that, we'll go right to the next slide, just so we can keep things moving and on time. You're being very generous with your time, spending with us over your lunch hour for many of you. So this is what we're looking to accomplish from the event today. We'll talk about some of the basics of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We're not going to get into detail, chapter and verse. There's a lot out there. Google is your friend. At the state level, a lot of stuff is still getting worked out. So what we're really hoping to do is help foster connections with other stakeholders in the region who are in the same place, or perhaps not, as you are. We're going to have a panel discussion with some folks to discuss really the strategies and tactics for maximizing the impacts, and do a little more small group discussion on how to build out some of those partnerships. I would ask, rather than, I know some of you will be eating lunch, that's fine, but please be ready to answer questions, participate in the chat, and interact with your peers across the region as part of this. This is meant to be very interactive, but also very informal. You'll notice from my prepared remarks, it'll be pretty informal. So hopefully we can do that and capture some of the energy. What we're hoping you'll leave this event with is some more information about the bill, maybe some of the nuance or some of the stuff that isn't in the headlines, some ideas for how you could collaborate on projects, and hopefully a little more energy on what's possible for the region. Next slide, please, Emma. This is being done in the context of the Southwest PA Water Network. As many of you on the call will know, the Water Center, along with the Institute for Conservation Leadership, the Academy of Natural Sciences, and many, many folks in the region have been working over the last several years to help build out this network. The vision is really about connection. We've got diverse water stakeholders. How do we bring people together to pursue a shared vision, attract more resource, and do that in a way that improves integrated water management? The goals are helping create a regional identity. Southwest PA is a big part of the upper Ohio River Basin. Does it see itself as that? How can it help build that identity across the region? Also create safe, open, productive space, working across divides, urban, rural, red, blue, public, private, etc. Everybody needs to work together to make this work better. But there are people doing amazing work already in the region. How do we leverage that work and amplify those efforts so people know more about it? and it empowers them. And also improve information and data sharing. There's a lot of information, a lot of data out there, but it's not always getting to the folks who could use it. And I obviously have to thank the Heinz Endowments, who've been very generous in supporting this multi-year effort. I think we're nearing the end of the third year of this effort in the region, or fourth year rather. So this has been a major undertaking. Next slide, Emma. As far as the basics, I won't go into too much gory detail. You can discover this independently. But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the infrastructure bill, specifically for water, $50 billion new money nationwide for water infrastructure over 5 years. You see the numbers for the clean water and drinking water. So basically wastewater, drinking water, state revolving funds, 15 billion for lead service line replacement, 10 billion for emerging contaminants. And while obviously the devil's in the detail, generally speaking, the parameters allow states more flexibility, ways to enrich the grant and loan mix, and allow ways for states to put more into technical assistance dollars. So the net effect should be more flexibility and ways to get funding for projects earlier in their stages of development. The bulk of the PA share, that stuff that is traditionally PennVest style funding, will be administered through PennVest, and those details are under development right now. So this is a pretty good time to work to stay abreast of what's going on at the state level. But one of the things we want to point out, and hopefully some of our panelists will talk to a little bit, is there are other funding avenues, not just the headline water numbers. You've got $2.3 billion for acid mine drainage, abandoned mine reclamation over 15 years. Almost $5 billion for orphan wells. You've got a lot of resilience money and flood management money through FEA, NOAA, and the Corps. And there are other very big pots of funding that can be leveraged to benefit water projects, such as transportation and other pots. So it's not just about that headline water number. So there is a lot of possibility here. The other point I would make, it's not just all at once this year. It's over multiple years across multiple programs. So you don't need to be in panic mode if you don't have a project that is quote unquote shovel ready. Next slide, please, Emma. As far as some of our observations in working with the water network and stakeholders in the region, there is a sense that we've heard time and time again that Southwest PA has underperformed in attracting water infrastructure funding in the state, particularly when compared to the Susquehanna/Chesapeake and the Delaware River Basin. Working together can help fix that. And part of why this network development process is underway is a response to this larger sentiment. As we get into discussions, one of the things that I'd like to keep in mind and help guide the conversation. First off, it's obvious, but it needs to be said. It's important to have a plan. And the more you can do up front to enlist multiple stakeholders, multiple sectors, multiple levels of government, et cetera, that's important. And I know our panelists will be speaking to that. The second point is, particularly at this moment, don't be afraid to think big and don't be afraid to think long term. Yes, it's really complicated. It takes more time to put it together, but the benefits can be very real. You can realize very significant economies if you find ways to work together and put together larger projects that accomplish more than what a lot of little projects could do. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of talk at the federal guidance level of this idea of shovel ready versus shovel worthy. 12 years ago or so in the financial crisis, when there was a big infrastructure funding push, shovel ready was the word that was used. Were those always the best projects to fund at that time? So there should be more openness to early stage project development in how this funding comes down, but it's obviously going to be subject to the interpretation of the states. Next slide, please. Let's first take some inventory, and I'm going to ask you to be doing some clicking on this one. You'll see Miriam has dropped into the chat a link to Mentimeter. We're going to ask you some questions and then share what it's telling us. You know, and please answer these honestly. Has your organization started discussing how to address, how to take advantage of these funding opportunities? You see some people answering already. Give it another second or two while people figure out the link. I know it's not always super quick, but all right. So tells us the majority of you, by and large, your organizations have been discussing it. But this is a good time to start asking questions of your organization about, what is your strategy to take advantage of this. Next question. And feel free. This is not discoverable. Take a guess if you're not 100% sure. But what funding sources are you and your organization familiar with? Where have you gone in the past for funding, or where would you typically think to go for funding for your organizations? And I know we've got people. Yes, please.
So, I'm sorry. We can only pick one for that, right?
No, I think you should be able to pick several.
Oh, do I have to hold down the control key or something to pick more than one?
If you're only able to pick one, pick the one you're most familiar with. Sorry about that.
That's okay then. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't doing something wrong. Thank you. And
again, this is just more to give you guys a sense of who else is on the line, and get a sense for where the folks in the region are at on this. And the third question. Do you think you're confident about the different funding sources available? I love this. I love watching the curve develop. This one's always fun. So I'd say it's middling, which is, a pleasant surprise, because this represents some pretty significant change. So the fact that we've got people who, as many people feel generally confident as don't, which is a good one. With that bit of centering and grounding, what we're going to do now is invite you to move into some breakout groups. And what we'll be asking to do is discuss those three questions. There's not going to be a formal report out. We're going to have basically some folks in the breakout groups who'll be pulling some notes together that we'll be able to share with folks after the event. But the breakout groups aren't recorded, so it's a chance for you to talk and get a sense for where some of your peers in the region are on these questions. So with that, I'll hand it over to the breakout groups. when you come out of the breakout room, you're muted. Who knew? Everyone but me. Hope everybody had a chance to talk to some folks that they didn't know well, or learn some new folks, some new stuff from folks that they did know. We're going to go right to our first panelist, so we can keep this thing on schedule. Many of you will know Lydia Morin from Connect, and she's going to give some examples how intermunicipal partnerships have helped her member communities leverage their efforts and bring more funding into their active regions. So with that, I'll hand it over to Lydia.
Hey everyone, good to see lots of familiar faces here today. I haven't been to one of these meetings in a while, but I know you guys have made a ton of progress. So I'm here mostly just to kind of emphasize the importance of doing the relationship building now. A lot of you already get that, but around projects. Connect in the last 3 years has really grown our budget and our capacity through really strong partnerships and, subbing or asking other organizations to sub on our grants. And as you all know, there's a ton of dollars out there that most funders would prefer to see a good amount of collaboration on. So Connect's model really is not based on coming together when there's an opportunity, but in like a reactive way, but to be very proactive in getting to know who has those other strengths or needs or, priorities. And right now, Connect is actually working on bringing a big priority-based budgeting software to our network, because at the end of every really exciting conversation, it often gets punctuated with, well, who gets what and who has what to spend on it now, who can match where, and whose priorities match ours, who's near us, or even for things that are more virtual, who has the same need. And so we've been spending a lot of time in our working groups really looking at where our priorities are. And so I think a lot of you have heard me talk about Connect before, but those that don't, we're the Congress of Neighboring Communities. We bring together the city of Pittsburgh and about 40 governments who share borders either with the city of Pittsburgh or kind of one more ring out as we're growing. And we're growing in that way because folks are getting excited in what we're doing. And so we recently changed our bylaws from having to have a direct tie to the city of Pittsburgh to just being a contiguous neighboring community. A lot of the state agencies that we're working for on little research, either research or implementing type projects, see our resolutions now as sort of a group of governments resolving to do the same thing. And that is really helpful to have that relationship and that strength to point to when we go for a funding source. And it's something that our members, who are all governments, so the governments are the members, and then every year they elect member representatives to vote and to represent them at our executive committee. Sorry, it's so strange talking to not a single person. Anyway, I lost my train of thought there, but so what I think I was invited here to do is talk a little bit about our model, but I think a lot of you just looking at the names are pretty familiar with Connect. And so I would be happy to just sort of highlight the climate action planning process that we're doing with the Department of Environmental Protection, which involves all 40 of our paying members right now. And a lot of the projects and the funding sources that we're putting in there are things that we're looking for partner orgs to work on us with, and that we can provide a lot of support towards your efforts if you're kind of going for funding in one of these areas. So and we are still in the comments stage of that plan. So if you go to connect.pitt.edu/cap, we would welcome comments from any of you, especially those of you that are in the region, but also there are certain projects that really geographic boundaries don't matter for, especially when it comes to technology, licenses, different planning efforts. And so there are some interesting opportunities in there to work with folks throughout the water network, because Connect's members are the ones who vote on our strategic direction. That's our executive committee that does that. But then we have these 4 working groups that are working on different funded projects that have utilities and nonprofits and governments that aren't necessarily voting members, but are similarly valued and, you know, have the same priorities as we do. And we're like very interested in how we're approaching it. And we're very interested in how they're approaching it. So we share a lot of ideas, but in this all, we do exactly like the network does here. We're building relationships. We're trying to do matchmaking when folks come to us with the same kind of, you know, challenges or opportunities. And the URL, here, I'll put the URL in the chat. It's connect.pitt.edu/cap. And there's a PDF document that's available for the public to be commenting on. And so we've been doing this big community engagement push on the residents. So we've been surveying the residents on behalf of our municipalities, and they've been pushing that survey out. So we think we have close to 2,000 responses across residents in our region about what they care about. And then when our elected officials know that they've got residents saying, we need you to do this stuff, and that we are aware of it, they're much more compelled to act. And so we've got a lot of folks who are really excited about it. And yeah, I'd love to have your comments on there, especially around all your water experts. And we'd love to hear what you're working on. So my email is just, I'll put it in the chat, and you got me on Basecamp anyway, because we're all linked up that way through the network, but happy to hear what you're working on. We love working with the Water Collaboratory just down the street from us on Pitt campus. And we love working with you all. So I will just leave you with this, because I think it's something that I'm stressing a lot lately. You don't really get married to somebody without dating them and getting to know them. And these big proposals that you go together, this is the same as a marriage proposal, right? You got to get to know your partners ahead of time. It's not the best to go to someone you've never talked to before and say, hey, you want to split $2 million, right? Like that can get a little weird. So I'm really just emphasizing that this stormwater network here is such a great place to build those relationships. And that's what Connect does. And our doors are open to, you know, get to know whoever is interested in stuff that we're interested in. And I think you can see a lot of this possibilities in our climate action plan, and feel free to rip it a new one. We've been getting hundreds of comments from our members, and we're addressing every single one. So we love that. And thank you for the opportunity, Water Center.
Sure. Thanks, Lydia. And yeah, we'll do a follow-up with the attendees. With any information, feel free to reach out direct to us too if you want us to set up a conversation. Next panelist, Ellen Kohler, is the Director of Applied Research and Programs at the Water Center, with a lot of background in water infrastructure finance. So, and she'll be sharing her own slides. So please take it away, Ellen.
Okay. So I just have a couple of slides to share, and what I'm going to focus on more, I am going to get into a little bit more of the background on the IIJA in terms of some of the details, and build a little bit on what Carl has to say, but not really nitty gritty. My goal here is to just, mention some ideas, some of these other pots of money and how they could be leveraged to spark some conversation around financing water projects. So first, what's in the IIJA that's coming to Pennsylvania specifically in a formula-based funding? So what that means is those dollars are coming to Pennsylvania, the state is administering those dollars, and the state gets to decide the process for how and where they're going to hit the ground. So a lot of us have been talking about the PennVest dollars, that typically go into treatment plants and pipes for distribution and collection systems. Also can go into green stormwater infrastructure. What I want to point out there is that, so this 87 million is on top of what PennVest already is getting on an annual basis. It's about doubling the amount that PennVest usually gets for both clean water and drinking water state revolving funds. In 2019-2020, PennVest spent about 17% of their funding on non-point source projects. So that includes green stormwater infrastructure, tree planting, like the kind of projects that you all might be talking about, as opposed to replacing some pipes in a system. So PennVest is a source for funding for those kinds of projects. PennDOT's obviously getting a chunk of change, and they obviously manage roads, but that also means that they manage road runoff, and that runoff obviously impacts our rivers and streams. So one thing to keep in mind here is that PennDOT is now got an MS4 permit, so it's that is, it's required to now comply with, and the way this current permit is structured is they have to do a pollution reduction plan on a basin scale, actually. So they're putting one together for the Ohio River Basin, and it's going to require that they reduce sediment loading by 5%. So PennDOT needs to now start implementing some projects, and DEP is encouraging them to partner with municipalities. We're starting to see RFPs coming out for PennDOT saying, hey, if you've got projects that are going to reduce sediment, like here's our RFP that you can submit, and maybe we'll pay you to put those projects in. So that, that's an opportunity as well in terms of partnering with PennDOT and getting some of those dollars to hit the ground for water quality. And as Carl mentioned, there's the money that's through the abandoned mine reclamation funds. This is a big chunk of money, and not all the states in the country are getting this, right? Like, this is pretty special for Pennsylvania, this chunk of change. And it's a lot more than what's coming in for the state revolving fund. And so that's really important. And it's really important for you all to consider how to make those dollars hit the ground in a really positive way for your communities with respect to water quality. And again, it's over 15 years. Most of the other dollars are over 5 years. So this is a longer term to it too. Some of you probably already are working on these kind of projects, but this is really a big pot of money that we could really figure out how to leverage in a really exciting way in this region of Pennsylvania. So I also want to talk just a little bit about some of how the other dollars are hitting the ground in other programs. So these dollars are going to hit the ground through grant programs. So they would be in addition to the formula funding that's coming into Pennsylvania, and they would be sort of, one-off things like you apply for a grant and you're successful in receiving that grant. So on top of all that formula funding, there's opportunities through these grant programs. The primary focus of the grant program might not be the water quality or water resource challenge you're trying to address, but the outcomes of the project might, align and still create benefits for water resources. So for example, the FEMA funding that's either through the BRIC program, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, or through the Flood Mitigation Assistance program, those two grant programs, obviously are addressing resiliency and flooding, but the project that you implement may also have water quality benefits too, right? So in terms of the FEMA dollars, there is the BRIC funding. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Program is getting an additional $3.5 billion under the IIJA, that's nationally. So that's a significant increase there. And those programs, both those programs are going to be tied to hazard mitigation planning. There's also funding that comes through the Natural Resources Conservation Service. A lot of us probably think of those as more ag programs, but there are some really important dollars that flow on a broader scale, like for watershed and flood prevention. And this program is getting another $918 million from the IIJA to get on the ground across the country. There's also the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with that program. Again, traditionally, folks have seen this hit the ground in terms of implementing ag best management practices, but it can also be used to address watershed challenges. And this funding has been well leveraged in other parts of Pennsylvania. There's there's annually $300 million available for this program that comes through the Farm Bill. There's no additional dollars through IIJA, but it's a resource that we should be looking at in terms of how we can get it to hit the ground in Southwest PA to the maximum extent possible. And I just have this other piece about the surface mine reclamation. I'm not thinking about the fact that you're all seeing all these other people, sorry. That this is just, the kinds of projects that those dollars can help fund in terms of what you might be interested in Pennsylvania. So these are the kinds of projects in Pennsylvania that have been funded through that program. And then my last slide here really is just to make the point that as Lydia mentioned, partnering is a financing strategy. It is a way for you to bring in expertise that you might not have in your organization. It is a way to realize efficiencies, to reduce costs. It is a way to have a stronger voice, as Lydia very well put it, and helps build community support for your project, for the work that you're doing. And again, funders like it. They like to see that their dollars are impacting a larger area and having a bigger impact. So think creatively about who your partners are, build those partnerships. As Lydia said, it does take time, but that time is very well invested. You might find a partner that has an existing plan that you can leverage to help start implementing. And I just want to point out as an example here with going back to the PennVest dollars and some of those non-point source projects, some of them have been funded in Allegheny County, and the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, for example, has worked with 3 different municipalities in the Pittsburgh area and a school district to implement 3 different projects and bring in over $2 million to implement those projects. So land conservancies can be really important. Absolutely have seen the role of conservation districts as being incredibly important and catalytic across the state in Pennsylvania in terms of improving water quality and the different programs they manage, both in terms of federal dollars, but also in state dollars. And what I found exciting already about our conversation is talking about different sources already, growing greener. In my chat room, we were talking about DCNR dollars, which are wonderful to leverage those in terms of particularly planning dollars. And then at the state level, there's also Commonwealth Financing Authority grant dollars that can be used to get things up and running too. So that's all I had to share right now. I think I'm turning it over to Adrian.
Yeah, and I would say while Adrian is pulling her slides up, we're gonna probably have a few minutes after Adrian's presentation to answer any questions you want to put into the chat. So from Lydia or Ellen's piece, or from Adrian. So feel free to drop any questions in the chat, or if you have an answer for what you see in the chat, engage in a conversation. With that, we'll hand it over to Adrian Smochek, who's going to talk specifically about how to get your state reps and your other lawmakers on board, because so much of this happens at the state level. So with that, thanks, Adrian. We'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Carl. As Carl mentioned, my name is Adrian Smochek, and when we talk about building relationships, the title to this webinar, I'd like to focus on that one particular type of very important and relevant relationship, which is that with your lawmakers. Currently, I serve as district manager for State Representative Jim Struzzi, whose district includes Central and Southern Indiana County. Jim is in year 2 of his second 2-year term. And he was the first freshman member appointed to the House Appropriations Committee. So this kind of afforded him a little bit of a trial by fire, being thrown into appropriations as a freshman. He gained some really valuable insight to state government operations through appropriations very early on. And he's also a member of the PennVest board. So our offices were no strangers to project or funding requests. Prior to Representative Struzzi's election, I served on the staff of the former House Majority Leader, Dave Reed. I started with Dave in 2008 when he was a rank and file member of the House. He became policy chair in 2011, and then in 2015, he became majority leader of the House. And both of those changes really significantly impacted how we interacted with organizations and individuals across the state. Some do better than others at approaching their legislators and expressing their need and garnering support. And it's not necessarily because of the legitimacy of their ask or their cause, but it's often approach, or worse, not approaching at all. So today I'd like to share with you just a few key points on how to approach your lawmakers for support. So some of you may do this well already, and for those of you who do that, it might be a little bit of a common sense review. But in 13 plus years of doing this job, I'm still surprised at times by the styles of approach to our office. Or I'm disappointed when I hear that people are nervous or afraid to approach their lawmakers for support, or that they didn't for whatever reason. So I figure if I can share a few of those things with you, maybe it can empower you to be confident in making those asks of your lawmaker and building the relationships that can help your cause in the long term. The first piece of advice I can offer is this, and it's try not to make assumptions about where your lawmaker stands on an issue or a project. To start, I'd like to just put it out there. My boss is a Republican lawmaker. We all know how deep the political divide is these days, and it's far more drastic than any other time in my lifetime. I feel that's for certain. But it's very important to come right out and say, really make an effort to avoid making these assumptions about where your lawmaker stands on an issue simply based on their party affiliation. Our political system is such that there are two dominant parties. Rarely do we find that anybody fits that mold to a T. Many environmental and conservation related matters can be seen by some as very partisan, and I think that's often a result of how those issues are framed. I personally want to work to see that change, and I think we've made some progress in doing that, but making assumptions going into things can really hurt your cause, and even if you're not aware of it, it can really set a negative tone for your conversations. So it's crucial to your cause that you give your lawmaker the benefit of the doubt and approach them in fairness. Next, I'd like to point out that it's important to do your research and frame your ask carefully. Just as you shouldn't make assumptions about where your elected representative stands, the more you can know for certain about them and their work, the better prepared you can be going into a meeting or an ask of them. If it's possible, follow them some before approaching them. Do some research, subscribe to their e-news or their social media. Most lawmakers have at minimum a website and a Facebook page, and usually there's some video commentary on there where you can track that down and get a feel for what their style is or what it is they're passionate about. Read their biography if you can, or read their voting records, bills that they've sponsored. Many of you might be familiar with the General Assembly's website, www.legis.state.pa.us. So you can visit this site for a number of reasons, but of course to look for legislation. Along the left side, you will find a white box that kind of looks like this, where you can search by keyword for legislation, but you can also search by sponsor. You can plug in House or Senate and a specific name, and it'll give you a list of the bills that particular legislator has sponsored. It's good to take a look at those before you're approaching someone, so you have some idea of what it is that they're passionate about. Sometimes after doing that kind of homework, maybe you still have a feeling that where they stand might not be favorable to where you are on things or your project or request, but it's still important to try to find a way to approach the subject that might pique their interest. Frame your approach carefully or in a more neutral way. If you know that their background, if you know what their background and policy interests are, tie your project into something that matters to them if you can. And no matter what the issue, try to avoid going into it with an all or nothing mentality. Partial support or partial funding is always better than none at all. And you don't have to compromise where you stand on something to do this either. Don't compromise where you stand on any subject, but it's likely you're not going to change a legislator's mind and they're not going to change yours on something, but there are ways to open the door to that conversation and at least gain partial support. Try not to be negative, accusatory, or defensive about anything going into it, and try to stick to matters that are maybe more common ground at first. Tie your work into a broader subject that's less opinion driven and more widely supported. Just for an example, I found that across the board, regardless of party, most lawmakers respond well when you talk about public health, youth, economic opportunities, things like that, that you can kind of pull out, try to pull out a thread from your project that ties into one of those broad subjects that you can kind of start with as common ground. But most importantly, I want to stress, don't avoid approaching your lawmaker just because you assume they won't support you. Having those conversations is crucial. That kind of brings me to my next point, which is to try to make an effort in involving your lawmakers in the work that you do. From time to time, I know I find out about state grant applications that have gone in without the knowledge of my office, and it's disappointing to me and my boss to hear people say they don't get state funds for this or that cause, particularly if they haven't approached us to talk to us about those things or made those asks or put in those applications. So it's not really a given that we can secure that funding for you. We don't have a golden seal of approval by any means, but don't underestimate the power of the support of your lawmaker. It's possible that they might have an opportunity to actually reach those decision makers. They often run into people in Harrisburg before or after a meeting. They can actually put in a personal word of support for you if it's something that you've made a good case for. a particular round of funds had opened here in locally, and I found out in a local board meeting that an application was submitted, and we hadn't known about it. And our office had been asked to do about 5 or 6 other letters of support for this same pot of funding. So I knew there were a handful of other projects going in locally, but this one seemed to be the only one that would have gone in without a letter of support from our office. And that might not seem like a big deal, but I can't help but think about it from the inside, working with the bureaucracy in Harrisburg, the decision makers on that particular program, looking at that and wondering why was that the only one that didn't have support from their lawmaker. We would have definitely supported it had we known. So I can't stress enough, it's always worth the time for you to make that ask. It's kind of shooting yourself in the foot, so to speak, not to at least give it a shot and approach for support. It's really not a secret that your legislators love being asked to come out to your public events. They like to be around their public and meet people, take photos and all of those good things, but they really need to know what you're working on. Even if you feel like, hey, they've never come before, I'm not going to bother this time, keep asking. It's still important. Even if you think they don't support you, I kind of revert back to my first point, don't assume that you know where they stand on things. It's still worth taking the time to involve them and inform them. Your state representatives and your senators come in contact with so many people from all types of organizations and interests, and they come across an equal amount of opportunity to make connections for you and introductions. So a little bit of effort on your part can go a long way to keep them in the loop and maximize the potential benefits you can get out of that relationship. Much of our public contact at this point comes through our website, through a website submission link. 10 years ago or so, that really wasn't the case. We were still getting a lot of written letters and phone calls, but in this digital age, it is perfectly acceptable for you to communicate via email, fire off a quick email to your lawmakers. It's especially acceptable too to be more informal like that if you've already fostered a relationship with them. And you can do that quickly, just shoot them a line about what's happening or what's going on. I know my boss personally reads every email he receives. And every web submission that comes through our website, he lays eyes on those himself. And you'd be surprised how many times he's actually made an effort to connect people or involve them in different initiatives simply because he's aware of them. He knows they're out there. They've taken the effort to reach out to us. We've sent many invitations for testimonies for committee hearings, sought opinions on different legislative proposals, and asked for input on state budget hearing questions simply because someone's taken the time to reach out and we know who they are. I know many of you would love to have the opportunity for that kind of feedback and involvement. Please know that it's attainable. Build a relationship and you can be a part of that process too. Just keep that in the back of your mind, even a quick email. It's just let us know about what you're working on, a project, an event, or a concern. It's perfectly acceptable and very effective. When it comes to building relationships, don't forget that staff are your allies. Most of us know that receptionists or frontline employees at an organization are referred to as the gatekeepers. And that is so incredibly true with legislative staff. Get to know them, involve them in your invitations. Doesn't replace your interactions with your lawmakers directly, but it can really have an influence on things. And I can personally attest to this. Representatives are very busy. I know firsthand exactly how busy they can be. There are times when with 3 of us on staff, we can't keep up with all of our obligations, but know that it's valuable when a staffer is sent to your events. That means your legislator values you. Often staff do a lot of the legwork behind the scenes. Make sure that you are a face and a name that is familiar to them as much as possible. And just to close up here, just a few of the basics that you might want to keep in mind when approaching your legislator for that ask. Try to have as much detail as possible. If you're in the exploratory stage of grant possibilities, provide as much information as you can. Quantify your ask. If you're at the point where you're ready to make application, this is especially important. Likewise, if you're asking for a support letter, provide a narrative of your project. Summarize why it'll benefit your area and why it will benefit that particular lawmaker's constituents. If you have a copy of an application, even if it's not completed, try to provide that. Try not to wait till the last minute. Legislative staff have been busier than ever in the last couple of years, so try to be aware of that and give them some time to get things submitted. And speaking of time, the representative had asked me to mention too, he reviewed this for me, and the one input that he had was just be aware of our time too when you're approaching us. Know that our time may be limited, so try to be as concise as possible and make the most of your time with us, and you can do that by being prepared. When you meet, be clear how you want things submitted. Let us know. Do you want a hard copy? Do you want it by email? How would you like that back? If you're looking for a letter, don't assume that we know what you're looking for. So you have to be clear on that. And it's okay not to have all the answers. Ask questions and let us serve you. That's what we're here for. So we want to serve you and your needs, and it's important to us too. I want to thank you for taking the time to participate today. My contact information is up here on the screen. Thank you. I hope you found it beneficial, and I thank you all for the wonderful work that you do to improve water in southwestern Pennsylvania and beyond.
Thanks, Adrian. That was great. And I will ask if the presenters can just let me know in the chat if you're okay with us sharing your slides. I'm assuming it'll be fine, and if that's the case, we'll be happy to distribute that to everybody. With that, a couple of different perspectives coming from different pieces, but all important pieces of the puzzle. We're going to ask you for more information and get you to talk to each other again, because that's what we do. Another couple of questions on Mentimeter. If you want to go ahead and follow that link.
People should be able to vote for multiple things this time.
Okay.
I've changed it. My apologies. That was the original intent.
Can you repost the link because I joined late, at least online? Thank you.
So give that another 15, 20 seconds or so. So pretty good wide distribution, but everybody's got stormwater. I'm assuming a lot of folks are stormwater and something else, or stormwater or water to it, because stormwater touches a lot of different pieces. So especially anywhere where it rains. So okay, so surprisingly nice distribution with a focus on stormwater, which is not shocking. And we'll share these with you guys too. We'll figure out a way to share this with everybody. And the next question. Who, if you're not in one of these silos, who would you see yourself most likely to partner with? And again, you can click multiple on that one too. Imagine a lot of people are picking AMD because they saw how much money is going into AMD. Good, nice to see environmental justice, community engagement on there, but otherwise a nice broad distribution. One water in action, I suppose. So good, useful information that we will share with all of you. And with that, we're going to move into another round of conversations, really more about what's worked well in partnerships you have, and who would you like to be working with that you're not. So really focusing on your answers to that second round of questions. And we'll see you all in a few minutes. Thanks. Hey, everybody, welcome back.
Okay, well, you cut off a really important conversation Ellen and I were having, just so you know.
Well, one of the things I was going to say it at the end, but we will be keeping the meeting open for about 10 minutes at the end if anybody wants to reconnect or have a larger, kind of interaction. But, that said, I'm glad it was an important conversation. So I hope that was useful for everybody, a chance to follow up and dig in a little deeper. Certainly was in the breakout room that I was part of. And let's talk about where we go from here. We're going to hit you with another Mentimeter. About where did this, is that something you're going to drop in, Miriam, or is that already out there for everybody? There we go. Thanks. I'm talking while other people are furiously doing everything behind the scenes. So, and this will stay open a little bit for you to. It says no questions from the audience now because no one had answered yet because this is just a slide. But as you're digging in there, feel free to be thoughtful about it and take some time. What would you like to talk more about, and where would you like it to go from here? What will we be doing? We'll be pulling together the slides. We're pulling together the Mentimeter results and anything particularly pithy and useful from the chat, and sharing that with everybody who attended. Also want to hear from you all about what you would like to, and feel free to raise it now in the chat or even speak up. We've got a couple of minutes. Where would you all like to see things go? And then we'll move more into what the water network is up to in the next few months as well. So anybody having initial feedback or something they'd want to share about this conversation that they just can't wait to get off the chest?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're very interested in at the Water Collaboratory is training undergraduates and graduate students to have a different perspective about how to interact with water, how to manage water, how to understand water. Are there any, does anyone see any avenues in any of these funding sources for that sort of mentorship training aspect to be a part of the new funding?
Emily, this is Ellen. I can say that I did not look at the funding streams with that in mind. So I can't say no, but I can say that what I looked at was not targeted to that kind of training. Now, that said, there's plenty of technical assistance dollars available. Like there's a lot of conversation around technical assistance and what does technical assistance actually look like? I think there's probably a lot more opportunity for conversation about what that looks like. And I will just say that at the Water Center, we very much have the same thinking in mind in terms of building the next generation of water leaders. So maybe we should just chat about how to do that offline and how we can collaborate to get that done, Emily, right?
Yeah, in my mind, it's key to resilience.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we got to, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, and thanks for that, Emily. And let's move to the next slide. And I think Miriam can give us a quick rundown of what's happening next for the Southwest PA Water Network.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at all the names, and there's some ones that I have not met yet, and I'm excited to get to know you better. Others have been much involved in the process of developing the water network. So I will keep this short and simple, but there's a few key ways to stay engaged. We have a Basecamp, which if you're not familiar with that platform, it is currently what we're using. It is up for discussion because I know some folks feel a little bit of Basecamp fatigue. It is. We are aware, but right now it's the current way that people are communicating upcoming events, how to connect with others, how to find others in the region that are doing similar water related work. So there's a few different opportunities to get engaged with, and I would recommend connecting with folks on Basecamp for these opportunities. I'll drop a link to join that in just a minute. One of them is working groups. So ongoing, we have a water data management group. They just actually went over beta testing yesterday on a data landscape resource. So basically figuring out who is doing what and where in Southwest PA, who is collecting data, who is using data, what type of data. And so there's a lot of conversations happening about just how to connect folks surrounding data. Second, we also have informal networking sessions. And really what that is there's a lot of different focus areas that people are passionate about or already working in, similar to what you had voted or ranked for on the Mentimeter. But they're not necessarily yet a working group solidified as that. So we have actually our leadership incubator is a program for early career professionals in water related activities in Southwestern Pennsylvania. And they're actually working together to coordinate 3 different informal networking sessions surrounding equity, environmental justice, and acid mine drainage, acid mine remediation, also stormwater and flooding, and then water education outreach. And so again, building off of those, there's usually an annual meeting. That's an all network meeting that kind of brings people together, refocus the attention on what's the direction that the network is going into. And so more information will be coming up on that in the coming month or so, but keep your eye out. So there's a lot of different opportunities to connect with folks. If you have any questions, you're welcome to shoot me a message, or I'll put my email in the chat as well. I will say we have really great big announcement. The Water Center at Penn is transitioning from our role in helping develop the water network to the water network having its own host organization that serves as the official employer for a local coordinator. And we're in the process of trying to list an advertisement for calls for applications for that coordinator position. And a couple of weeks ago, it was actually decided by a strategic working group that the Pittsburgh Water Collaboratory will be the new host organization. So lots of details need to be figured out, but that's a really exciting time for the network. And that's through the hard work from our strategic working group. So those are some high level updates. Again, I'm going to put some contact information and links if you want to learn a little bit more. But that said, Carl, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Miriam. And yeah, that wraps us up. I think our next slide is the one with Miriam's email address on it. If you want to reach out, it's also in the chat. And thanks for your time. Thanks for attending. And we're going to leave the room open for 5-10 minutes if anybody wants to stick around and talk informally. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending, and thanks for the Penn team who put a lot of the behind the scenes stuff together here.